Is the Gripen finally a game changer for Ukraine? Because Ukraine is getting the Swedish fighter jet Gripen. Why the Gripen can change the war in Ukraine far more than the F-16 or the Mirage 2000, later in the video. But also, how a leaked Russian map shows just how detached from reality the Russians are in the way they are waging this war. All that, and the developments along the front here in this situation, report on the Ukraine war. Music. Ukraine confirms that it has recently used Storm Shadow again against Taganrog. That means we have confirmation again that new cruise missiles were obviously delivered. In the process, a Russian airfield was hit, where different fighter jets are repeatedly stationed. So far, I don't see any confirmation of destruction. The oil refinery in Tuapse was also hit, and in Volgograd, the oil refinery was hit as well. The Russian mill blogger Romanov commented on this. Last night, debris and wreckage from the Ukrainian armed forces hit the region's largest oil refinery, and also attacked the Titan Research and Production Center, Titan Barakati. He is, of course, making fun of the fact that the Russian side always talks about debris and wreckage, but claims the Ukrainians are never successful, so they always act as if the drones were successfully intercepted. Romanov, mind you, is a pro-Russian military blogger, but one who is also critical. Furthermore, a drone crashed into a residential building in Romania. According to Romanian sources, there was not enough time to intercept it, as it was only in Romanian airspace for 4 minutes. The Romanian president then declared the Consul General of Constanta persona non grata and closed the consulate in response. According to the latest reports I have, there were several people injured. However, I haven't seen anything about fatalities. That would at least be some good news in that regard. Let's move on to the developments along the front. And there we have a Russian geolocation near Novotny Novotmitrivka. And that's in the Sumy region. At this point, there's practically no significant change. The Russians may have advanced about a kilometer further here than the previously contested area. Again, this is just an infiltration, so nothing that is necessarily permanent. Continuing further southeast, we move into the region, Kharkiv, and there, in the town of Roniv, we have confirmed a Russian presence. We have geolocated this here. That is south of Veteraname. Russian soldiers were seen in the village there, right here at this location. So they crossed the border here and were attacked there. It's clearly too early to conclude from this that they control the village, but it shows us that there was temporary Russian presence here. It should probably now be marked as contested. Further east, there's footage south of Vovchansk, where the Ukrainians are clearing a house. And that's in the village. We have it here, Shesterivka. And that's here. But if the Ukrainians are clearing a building here, then there must have been a Russian presence there. At least that's what we can conclude from it. So, infiltrations are still happening here as well. That's about 2 kilometers further south from what the pro-Ukrainian deep state map shows as contested. That was it for the region. Let's move on. I have no changes from Kupiansk, and from Borova, we have a very interesting report. It's about the village of Nove, right here. There, the Russian mill blocker says it's the Western group of forces. He says that fighting is taking place in Nove, which would imply a Ukrainian advance. Quite a story of its own. It's platoon 283 of the regiment. In the unit, they've already started forming and deploying anti-tank groups. So it's not about a calm defense, but rather preparing for a scenario where things could get serious. But there's a nuance to it. Let's put it this way. The guys there are completely exhausted and don't even want to stay at their positions anymore. If the people in the unit are already at their limit, discipline is crumbling, and on top of that, there's the expectation of a heavy Ukrainian attack. Then they quickly throw them the Black Mamba and put together anti-tank groups. I'm not sure what is meant by Black Mamba. I assume it's a nickname for an anti-tank weapon. But as I said, that's just my assumption. Sorry, I don't know the slang there. Continuing with the quote, brilliant. Just damn good management. First, bring the unit to the point where people start to scatter, in other words, to desert. then reinforce them and pretend that everything is under control now. Ultimately, it creates a consistent picture for the section. Fighting is taking place in Nowo. On another section of the front, a mechanized enemy attack is expected, probably with tank support. And the icing on the cake, units where the people are really fed up. As I said, this is from Norway. According to this mill blogger, the Ukrainians are reportedly already there. I don't have any other confirmation of that yet. That would be about 2 kilometers further from the previous Ukrainian positions. But there have also been recent reports of Ukrainian attacks from this region. At least according to Russian sources, the soldiers here are fed up. And if they're fed up with being tracked, or with people being able to follow what they're doing on the internet, then today's sponsor can help them. For my work, I often have to access geo-blocked sites. That's when I need a VPN. I've been using CyberGhost here for 4 years. CyberGhost VPN is one of the world's leading VPN providers with more than 38 million users. The VPN hides the IP address, encrypts the data, and routes all internet traffic through a secure VPN tunnel. The VPN allows access to over 40 popular streaming providers like Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime, Disney Plus, and BBC iPlayer. This gives you worldwide access without geo-blocking. Servers in 100 countries can be used for both business and personal purposes. The software available for Windows, Mac, iOS, Android, smart TVs, game consoles, and Linux is not only user-friendly, but can also be operated without any technical knowledge. If any problems do occur, support is available around the clock, of course also in German. Thousands of 5-star reviews on Trustpilot speak for themselves. As do over 38 million users, with one subscription, you can register up to 7 different devices at the same time. The login details may expressly be shared with your own family. By clicking on the link below, you will receive an 83% discount and then get an additional 4 months for free. CyberGhost offers a 45-day money-back guarantee, so you are taking no risk at all. We continue along the front towards the south, moving into the Lyman and Sloviansk region. I have no changes to report from either of them. There are still a number of geolocations coming from Kostiantynivka. There, we first have some very concerning news for the Ukrainians. 2 Russian soldiers who were attacked, practically in the heart of Kostiantynivka. Already at this point here, that is, if we zoom out, it's really more or less the center of Kostiantynivka, where Russian soldiers have now been. But at the same time, the Ukrainians are still active in the south. And that, of course, shows us the whole situation, how the front lines here basically no longer exist. And we still have Ukrainian positions here in the south of Ilanivka. Previously, we often had Russian presence here. There we see that it's by no means the case that just because we have the Russians at this spot, everything is suddenly under Russian control. The geolocations in this regard show a picture where the troops are massively scattered. We continue towards Stepanivka. There, we have the Russians to the east of it, and the Ukrainians again to the south of it. Again, at different locations here as well. So, Russians are roughly at this spot, Ukrainians are roughly at this spot. The whole front here, meaning the contested area, is significantly larger here. From the town of Kostiantynivka, we also have a Ukrainian military spokesperson, and he says, "We are currently not observing any troops. We are not observing troops holding permanent enemy positions." He says that everything happening within the city of Kostiantynivka itself are infiltrations, which are being fought accordingly. I can't confirm that. However, the fact that we are slowly seeing the infiltrations moving further north and deeper into the heart of the city would actually suggest that it is becoming realistic that the Russians have at least established themselves on the outskirts of the city. There is no evidence of this, though. The pro-Ukrainian deep state map shows parts of the city as contested, but none under Russian control. But as I said, this is a pro-Ukrainian map. From a distance, you can only guess at that. And as I said, the Ukrainians say these are not permanent positions. That seems a bit optimistic to me. Further west, towards Dobropilya, we have a Russian geolocation directly west of the village of Rudinska. That's right here at this spot. The Russians have slowly advanced into Rudinsky over the past few weeks, which even the deep state map admits. So if we look at this here, about a third of the village is now controlled by the Russians. The Russians would be on this side now. That means it's certainly too much, especially given the current front situation, to go so far as to say that Rudinske has already fallen. But we can see that the Russians are already operating to the west of it. And of course, that means the Ukrainian positions within Rudinska are heavily contested. That's all from the region. We have something else from the Pokrovsky direction. And there we have the Ukrainians inside the village of Tolstoy. That is directly north of Podubny, where we have had several Russian mill bloggers saying that the Ukrainians have entered Podubny. That is right here at this spot. So here we now have Ukrainian presence visually confirmed, and the deep state map has made a major update. If we look at this, we can see how significantly the contested area has been pushed eastward in this region. According to the pro-Ukrainian deep state map, this can't be emphasized enough. The Russians have been pushed back significantly. Dozens of square kilometers have been pushed back, which, as I have seen, would reduce the calculations of Russian gains this month to 4 square kilometers. How accurate these numbers are is not so easy to say without geolocation. And the fact that we have confirmed a Ukrainian presence inside Tolstoy does not necessarily mean that it is consolidated. Nor does it mean the Ukrainian presence was still there at the time of the recording. Then we have a recording from Novorossiysk, where the attack on the Admiral Essen took place. And here we can see anti-aircraft fire, as fired from the Russian side, targeting the incoming drones. And as I said, this is the main port that the Russians are now using for their fleet. By the way, these blue beams are most likely Dessler. That seems to be the most likely explanation. They're trying to disrupt the drone sensors this way. Alternatively, it could be something to visually mark the drones for anti-aircraft fire. I have explanations for both, I do. And both seem realistic. I can't confirm it for sure. And here we see, despite the anti-aircraft fire, the drone just comes in very calmly and hits the Essen. And as I mentioned, it didn't get its name for no reason. It's named after a Russian general who was almost a German. Let's move on to the general situation. And now this map has appeared. It's supposed to be from April. A Russian military map that, according to experts, appears authentic but cannot be verified. And even the person spreading it, namely this account here, says that if you follow his words, he's also not 100% sure how accurate it is. But what's interesting is that we're talking about the Zaporizhia front here. And by the way, this is a comparison of this map with the deep state map. This is the deep state map. This is the Russian map. So here, from the Russian side, they're acting as if they control much larger areas. Among others, Molotov-Machka, which we can see here, and also up here in the north, where at best there were only isolated infiltrations. So the Russians have never controlled this area at any point. If that's true, if this map is authentic, it's simply breathtaking. It would fit with what we've heard in the past. Because Gerasimov, for example, on the 21st, claimed that villages marked here as Russian were under Russian control. And all of this follows a long series of false reports, where villages were reported as captured. And Ukrainians were said to be surrounded, even though that wasn't the reality. Several thousand Ukrainian soldiers were reportedly surrounded by the Russians multiple times, but they were never presented. Neither prisoners of war nor corresponding numbers of casualties. And the villages, when they were mentioned by the Russians, if they were even captured at all, they were only captured months later. So it's a long line, a long series of such false reports. It's unclear at what point the false reports begin, how far down the chain of command, so to speak. But basically, it must be clearly stated that the whole thing is highly problematic, because villages supposedly under their own control, of course, can't just be bombed so easily to help their own soldiers. So if you claim that you already have this area under control, but you need a bomb dropped on this village because you actually don't control it, then this can lead to problems when you request the Air Force to bomb this village here, which is marked as being under your own control. And these are the kinds of things, also when it comes to artillery positions. I've talked about this more often recently. All of this shows fundamental problems. It also clearly shows Ukrainians where Russian priorities are. The Russians claim to have advanced in this direction, so the Ukrainians know they will most likely try to attack in this direction. That makes it easier for them to concentrate their defense and increases Russian losses as a result. Then we have the Financial Times, which writes, "The Russian head of state believes that his forces can capture the rest of the Donbass by autumn. After that, he intends to toughen his territorial demands. According to people who speak with him, One adds that Russia's greatest hope for a quick end to the conflict is that the US will put enough pressure on Ukraine for it to accept Moscow's terms. All of this currently seems completely unrealistic, that the Russians will capture the fortified belt by the end of the year. It's simply completely unrealistic in the current situation, and the Americans' ability to put pressure on Ukraine decreases with each passing day, as the Europeans are increasingly serious about supporting Ukraine, and at the same time, Ukraine's resources and armament are improving, and those are standoff weapons that are under Ukrainian control. Meanwhile, Ukraine continues to hunt down air defenses. And here, for example, we have a video that shows us how 2 command vehicles for Buk were hit. Of course, this could possibly mean the loss of the officer. We also have attacks here, including one on a radar system at this location. I saw this spot where the command vehicles were attacked. I found this footage here quite interesting, where we can see buildings being attacked, which are said to be a depot for anti-aircraft missiles and pilots, etc. And we can see the attacks. But what we're about to see is also something remarkable, because we have footage here and you can already see the next drone in the attack. That means we see. Here, effectively, we see that the Ukrainians are attacking in swarms. And that is very significant, that shouldn't be underestimated, because that means the enemy can be overwhelmed. If there's air defense there, it can only engage one target at a time, and if several come at once, it's much more likely that you can overcome the air defense that way. At the same time, you can see that if the air defense shoots down one of these drones, then the air defense system itself can be attacked and disabled by the other drone or drones. If targets suddenly appear, meaning a target of opportunity, if you suddenly discover something valuable, it can be hit as hard as possible, because there's no need to take a long time bringing in another drone, and at the same time, the enemy has no time to react. That means when the attack waves come, the Russians are attacked so quickly that even if they try to deploy any means to repel the attacks, it's simply too late. For example, soldiers. If they want to leave their trenches and run into some bunker or something like that, they simply don't have enough time for that. In addition, the Ukrainians are also showing the use of Ram-2X against Russian logistics. This is, if you will, a Ukrainian system that is comparable to the Russian Landsat drone. And here, by the way, we see an attack on a mobile air defense team. Here we see what is most likely a heavy machine gun being hit, and several tankers being attacked by the Ukrainians at different times in various locations in the rear area. And as you can see from the footage, we're only a third of the way through and already have numerous hits. The drone density is also clearly visible here in another shot. This is a drone that failed, for some reason. We can see it approaching here, and it doesn't hit the truck and destroys itself in the process. We have Russian soldiers here, but the second one is already coming. Moving on. There it comes already. That again. That means, even if the first one missed, now they know, yes, now that they've been discovered, they can escape, they can get to safety. But it takes, what, 20 seconds and the next one hits. That means, here too, we see how the attacks are happening more and more frequently and getting closer together. Then we have a statement from Antwerp. Apparently, cameras show that the ship which left the port of Antwerp was found in Oost-Oostlunga with limpet mines. The camera footage reportedly shows that the limpet mines were not on board because they were high enough up that they should have been visible from the cameras. That's the explanation. If that's true, then they must have been attached along the way, which makes the whole thing even more interesting. Because someone managed to approach the ship while it was at sea and attach mines there, obviously without the crew noticing. Then there's news on Russian air defense. Reportedly, the Russians are shifting air defense costs to the regions. We have talked on the channel in the past about massive budget overruns by the Russians. Obviously, they want to outsource more of the war costs to the regions, and thus support the federal budget a bit. Recently, there were images showing air defense systems being placed on top of a high-rise building in Moscow by helicopter. So things are moving forward here as well. And now we have the news that companies are now being involved in air defense. However, according to military informant, the way it works is that the companies buy the weapons, but effective control immediately passes to the military. So the companies are effectively financing the military indirectly. The whole thing, the plan is apparently that the air defense will also stay near the company to protect it. But since it technically belongs to the military, it could theoretically be moved. The Russian mil blogger Fighter Bomber also commented on this, and is, on the one hand, concerned about the control, which, if military informant is correct, should actually be secured. But there's also another question, and it's not an unimportant one. Where is this equipment supposed to be bought? Where are these shops located? In Russia. But as far as I know, there is, to put it mildly, a certain shortage of the mentioned protective equipment in Russia, even for the needs of the army itself. Otherwise, people wouldn't be collecting for electronic warfare and drone detectors, and we wouldn't see towers made of shit and sticks with laser pointers attached to them with electrical tape. Again, this is obviously open criticism of the fact that they have such great plans, but the weapon systems also have to be bought somewhere, and for that, they have to be produced somewhere. And then we have news from Ukraine itself about how they are increasing drone production. And so, the Financial Times reports here that Ukraine produced 141,441 more reconnaissance drones in the first 4 months of this year than in all of 2025 combined. In 4 months, they produced over 4 times last year's output. In the case of medium-range drones as well, during this period they produced 112 times as many, meaning that in just a third of the time they produced 3 times as much again. That also shows us the direction things are heading here. And for long-range drones, production has increased by 53%. And especially with medium-range drones, that's been a constant topic for a while now, because they're mainly being used right now in the south, along the land border here. And then we have the news that people in Ukraine were certainly very happy about. Sweden is promising 36 Gripen fighter jets. 16 Gripen CD jets, which are currently in use, will be handed over to Ukraine, and Ukraine will receive 20 Gripen EF jets, which are a new generation and don't have much in common with the old Gripen anymore. So it's a massive new development that builds on the previous model, but actually has little to do with the original aircraft itself. You could maybe compare it to the Hornet and the Super Hornet of the British. The Americans. So 16 CD models will be delivered, and 20 EF models will be ordered. The CD models, and that's the crucial point, will already arrive in 2027. The EF models, however, won't come until 2030. Ukraine has already started training pilots and mechanics for this. So here as well, preparations are being made to ensure the handover can happen quickly. And Zelensky says the magic word here, namely Meteor. Meteor. And it's very important to understand Meteor. Classic air-to-air missiles like AMRAAM, Sidewinder, the Russian missiles, I don't know, R-77 or similar. The classic air-to-air missiles usually have a rocket engine that burns for a few seconds. I've read several times that with the AMRAAM, the propellant only burns for 7 seconds. After that, it basically just glides. From then on, the missile moves forward without its own propulsion, relying solely on the kinetic energy provided by the rocket motor and the aircraft itself. So even though, in theory, the missiles can have long ranges, every course correction they have to make leads to massive energy losses. So every turn they have to make and every loss of energy naturally results in a loss of range. And airplanes, especially in the final phase, when the missile is really getting close to them, make evasive maneuvers, and these burn up a missile's energy tremendously. That's why missiles that you might find on Wikipedia listed as having a range of 200 kilometers are unlikely to actually achieve kills at 200 kilometers in reality. Normally, it's dramatically less than the number that's theoretically stated. The 200 kilometers are at best conceivable against civilian aircraft that have no warning systems on board, and that continue flying at a constant speed and on a constant course. Anything military that has evasive capabilities drastically reduces the effective range of such a missile. And Meteor is actually somewhat different in this regard, because Meteor uses a ramjet engine that provides thrust throughout its flight. Here, you can see the air intakes. That means it has its own engine, and this engine stays on during its operation. This also means that the missile's energy remains high, and evasive maneuvers by the target only reduce the effective range relatively little, because energy continues to be added. And that's what makes the Meteor, this air-to-air missile, in the eyes of most observers, currently the most dangerous air-to-air missile in the world. Kills at well over 100 kilometers are absolutely realistic, and that puts Russian fighter jets, which are currently dropping glide bombs on Ukraine, in serious danger. Here we have Voivoda. Voivoda is speaking. Here we have the Russian mill blogger, and he says, "The meteors, meaning the meteor missiles, can become a serious threat to our bombers, which are bombarding Ukrainian positions around the clock with FAB bombs and UMP-UMPC, that is, glide bombs." And that's an accurate assessment from him. Russia will have to keep its fighter jets at a distance from the front when the meteor appears at the front. Or it will lose fighter jets. That means the glide bombs can only be used at high risk from now on. As soon as the Ukrainians have Gripens, especially not just Gripens, but Gripens with meteor, that means a high risk for the use of glide bombs. And the more lucrative targets for the Russian glide bombs are not right at the immediate front, where the positions are often only held by 2 or 3 men. There are no longer bunkers with 50 soldiers inside, but the more attractive positions are further back, which would mean that the fighter jets would have to fly closer to the front and therefore take greater risks. Russia has now developed glide bombs with jet propulsion, but even there, the range is not so great that the Sukhoi 34 would be completely immune when dropping them. And besides, these bombs are of course significantly more expensive and therefore can't be used as frequently. That means the Gripen, if it gets the meteor, and at least Zelensky talks about it, could actually be a so-called game changer. But that has to be properly understood. It can change the game, or rather, the war. It can clearly change it in favor of Ukraine by making the Russians either lose more fighter jets when they use glide bombs, or making them use these much less or less effectively. But, and this is also important, Gripen alone, especially with only 16 units, would of course not be able to win the war for Ukraine, but it can noticeably change the course of the war. Thanks again to today's video sponsor, CyberGhost VPN. If you subscribe using the link below, you will receive an 83% discount and an additional 4 months for free, while also having a 45-day money-back guarantee at the start. And that's it for the situation report. Hopefully, I'll see you tomorrow for the live stream at 8 p.m. German time with a Q&A session, where you can also ask questions about today's topics. Subscribe so you don't miss anything. That's all for now. Thanks for your attention, and see you soon. At this point, I would also like to give my special thanks to Lieutenant Colonel Mahamuri, as well as Lieutenant Jans vom Eck, Uwe de Frey, nickname Ren, nickname 2Bib Karsten Schultz, Robert Veal, Vision Sound Lab, Lickchatter, NTX, Malermeister Noggle, Marcus F., Alex Rosenthal, Matt Best, Zickwriter 666, Muta 1000 Janis Gu, Zascha Müller, Cunningham Eustress. Thank you very much. Without you, this would not be possible.